Okay. All right, good afternoon. My name is Melissa Landa, and I'm the founding director of Alliance for Israel, a nonprofit organization that educates about anti-Semitism and about the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement against Israel. I am pleased to welcome you to today's workshop called, Can We Find a Path Forward for America's Black and Jewish Communities? And I thank you so much for joining us. America's Black and Jewish communities represent two people living in diaspora, one forcibly brought in shackles across the Atlantic Ocean from their indigenous homes in Africa, the other exiled from their home in the land of Israel thousands of years ago, and more recently fleeing the pogroms of Russia, the Holocaust of Europe, and the pogroms in Arab lands. America's Black and Jewish communities are also two peoples who have faced and who continue to face oppression and violence. Black Americans have endured slavery, oppression, and violence, slavery, lynching, Jim Crow, church bombings, institutionalized racism, police brutality, and more. American Jews have been subjected to, among other things, quotas, institutionalized anti-Semitism, harassment and intimidation, and mass shootings. Being two historically traumatized groups, America's Black and Jewish communities understandably share a complex relationship. While we have all seen the iconic photograph of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel walking arm in arm with the Reverend Martin Luther King, we have also seen signs of tension. For example, the Black Lives Matter movement, as opposed to Black Lives Matters, has incorporated inflammatory anti-Israel language into its charter, and many American Jews refuse to lend their support to the cause given that fact. Navigating this issue has caused friction within the Jewish community as well, with a range of viewpoints being expressed about how to respond. However, because both groups have demonstrated remarkable resiliency, creativity, and triumph in the face of adversity, they are also well positioned to empathize with each other and support each other as allies. With a focus on shaping a shared and supportive future, today's panel will address a variety of facets of the relationship between America's Black and Jewish communities. All four speakers today are members of Alliance for Israel's advisory board. All four speakers, each one, will speak for 10 minutes, followed by a live question and answer session. Stacey Aviva Flint received her BA in political science and a certificate in Judaic studies from the University of Cincinnati, and a master's degree in urban planning and public policy from the University of Illinois, Chicago. She was the policy director for Chicago's Jewish Council on Urban Affairs, where she advocated for housing reform, criminal justice, and Jewish African-American dialogue. Stacey holds a certificate in Jewish leadership from the Spertus Institute for Jewish Learning and Leadership, and she writes on the intersection of Black and Jewish experiences, consults on urban development, Jewish professional development, leadership, and multicultural training. Joshua Washington is the director of the Institute for Black Solidarity with Israel, or IPSI, an organization founded by his father, Dumasani Washington. Joshua is a composition graduate of the University of the Pacific's Conservatory of Music. He was previously the special events coordinator for IPSI, where he used his professional musicianship and music composition skills to put together live music for pro-Israel events all over the US and in Israel. He was chosen to travel to Israel twice, once as part of Kufi's Millennial Outreach, Israel Collective, and again as part of music performances with Victor Stursky's Wild Branches and Friends. Marta Braiterman Tanenbaum lives in Crown Heights, Weeksville in Brooklyn. Raised in Baltimore within a dedicated civil rights and Zionist family, she attended Oberlin College and beyond. A New York State certified teacher, Marta led classrooms in underfunded minority public elementary classrooms, Jewish teen and adult, and prison schools. Married to a rabbi for 37 years who served congregations in the Rust Belt and Catskills, Marta witnessed Jewish communities facing regional economic decline beyond their control. Noah Shufutinsky is a George Washington University senior majoring in Judaic studies. He was selected as the 2019 Elie Wiesel Martin Luther King Jr. Scholar at the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy, Oxford Summer Institute, at St. John's College at Oxford University. Beyond his academic career, he is a musician by the name of West Side Gravy, and we heard one of his songs in the opening of today's workshop. Through his campus activism as well as his musical endeavors, Noah highlights topics of racism and anti-Semitism and combating its manifestations in the modern world. And we are now going to begin with Stacey. Stacey, I'm going to unmute you and then ask you to begin. You should get a message. There you go.
Okay. Thank you, Melissa. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me here with you today. In our morning prayers as Jews, we are told of several actions whose power is beyond measure, space, and time. Vehavat shalom ben adam lehavero, bringing peace between a man and his fellow. First of all, I want to dedicate my words to my grandfather of blessed memory who just passed. He was a gentle giant, a farmer, and a lover of all men. He taught me so much about living in peace with all men. And after 95 years, his memorial was a rainbow of men and women who called him their Moses. I confess that I am a lover of peace. I confess I love Black lives and I love Jewish lives. I confess, like my granddaddy, I will always see the cup as half full. So what is the way forward for our communities? First of all, communication at the heart level. Both Blacks and Jews are peoples of historical and generational trauma. Dr. Maria Yellow-Hars Braveheart said in her research on historical trauma, that is the cumulative, emotional, and psychological wounding over the lifespan and across generations emanating from massive group trauma. She noted this with Holocaust survivors and their descendants. On a similar note, Dr. Joy DeGory has begun to educate on post-traumatic slave syndrome for African Americans. And she describes it as a set of behaviors, beliefs, and actions associated with or related to multi-generational trauma experienced by African Americans enslaved and their descendants. We must understand one another's triggers and histories. It's not a matter of who's more right or who's more wrong, but it is a matter that while there's enough blame to go around, we know that words, power plays, and denials of each other's rights are a fact of our history. We know that many outsiders want to provide commentaries on Israel or even on Black Lives Matter. But until we understand and acknowledge our historical traumas, we could be making things worse. There are political organizations that can and need to address these debates and the nuances. But on a human level, the Jewish and Black communities need to speak to one another on a face-to-face level. We must sensitize each other to the words and images that humiliate and frighten one another. One of the first things that I did when I worked in a community that was once predominantly Jewish and is now African American, there's a lots of former synagogues in that community, and the public school still bears the name Herzl. I found a descendant of former residents and had them fund a trip to the local Holocaust Museum for these students. After the trip, several remarked that they understood what the Jews went through and that it was similar to their own experiences. I would like to see the same where Jewish kids are taken to African American history museums and also to the Lynching Museum. Next, our generation cannot hold this generation to the narrative of Dr. King and the religious prophetic narrative. It's not of their time. Our youth are not religious, but they are spiritual. Like it or not, without a religious background, many instinctively know that Jews and African Americans have a role in history. Some of my deepest learning came from Pan-Africanist Edward Blyden, and he said this: judging from the utterances of many Jewish leaders, they recognize their exalted mission to the nations, but it would appear that they have suffered opposition, persecution, and for so many years, for so many generations, that they distrust their influences as witnesses among the nations. At the end of the day, we are a covenant people. We have an ancient Brit to one another and also to the world to be a light. Zedek, Zedek, Tirdov, justice, justice shall you pursue. Also, the African American community, we must be careful not to drink from the same wells of white supremacy that blame the world's problems on Jews or Israel, and then at the same time, tell us that Black lives don't matter. Racism and anti-Semitism often come from the same well of hate for both of our communities. white Jews need to use white privilege. I know it's ridiculous, but it's the fact of American society. Don't get weighed down by white guilt, but use white privilege. I was taught during my social justice days, activism and training, that when we were participating in marches and social disobedience, I saw Rabbi Marx stand up to his own community that cautioned him against marching in Selma or Skokie with Dr. King to have a hands-off approach, but he did it anyway. Jane Ramsey and Luke Feinberg lived their lives using their white privilege to help causes such as fighting against police brutality, so that the former police chief in Chicago was brought to justice and many wrongly accused African Americans were released from death row. Blacks and Jews, religious and non-religious, stuck together for years to see that fight to the end. Lastly, I just want to say this. We all want our children to be nurtured in a safe space. We want them to grow to maturity and have their voices lifted up. Rachel Gilmer is a child born in the village, born to a white Jewish mother and an African-American father. She was raised participating in Young Judea. Today, she's disavowed her Jewish religion and her heritage. And do you recognize this name? Rachel Gilmer is one of the founders of the movement for Black Lives Matter and the author of the platform that says that Israel is an apartheid state committing genocide. I could spend the rest of my time defining genocide and how the growth of the Palestinians, this is not the case, or recount how South African voices say that they do not see the same thing, or my own experiences living in Africa during the time of apartheid and seeing its fall. But not today. I speak as a mother of both villages, a Jewish mother and a Black mother. There's an African proverb that says, a child rejected by the village will burn it down just to feel its warmth. Rachel Gilmer is our rejected child. How can I say this? I too have biracial children, have had the questions asked, have heard the word Svartsi, that have heard, are you gonna steal something from Hebrew school? Or begged that their wild hair be tamed at camp so it can match their almost passing white passing skin. Have we as a Jewish community gone in private to ask her to tell us the stories of how she was not protected, perhaps even ask for forgiveness? I bet she was taught Zedek, Zedek, Tir Dof, but did we feed her Jewish spiritual soul? Because in her own words, she says, when I got connected to social justice, I found my spirituality in the heart of organizing. Sadly, I have met far too many Rachel Gilmers, both white Jews and Black Jews. Politics will always be around, and many Jews will find fault ourselves, even with Israel and its politics. Our children need us to focus on them. They need to know that they are welcomed in the village and that they're safe. I want our Black Jewish child to feel that they're welcome when they walk into a Black space, and that they don't have to defend the politics of a country, but they can be respected for who they are, because being Jewish is more than politics. I want a white Jewish child, perhaps a descendant of Holocaust survivors, not to be traumatized. They are not responsible for the policies of a country. They are alive because their family survived, because Jewish lives matter. And as a Black Jewish child, I want them to walk into a Jewish space and feel at home. What's the path forward? To my Jewish community, let's take care of our Black children in our own villages. We might not agree with some of the paths our daughters such as Rachel have taken, but she is still our own, and perhaps reaching out to understand what we could have done and what we can do now to ease her pain. We need to make Jewish spaces respectful of all in word and deed. And as we extend our hands to the African American community, we need to be authentic, that we too have often gotten caught in the trappings of white privilege and self-preservation, and we need to acknowledge that we are making changes and will continue to honor our own multiracial heritage. I also propose conversations, remembrances, even seders where we speak of our ancestors, of the Holocaust and slavery, and how different symbolism and language can trigger our worst fears. To my Black community, we have children of the village as well. Just because we went to Hebrew school and not Sunday school, just because we love Israel but can separate between a homeland, a religion, and politics, we want our children to be addressed by their names, not "hey, light skin." We want to participate in telling the stories of our Black and, where appropriate, Jewish ancestors. And we want to build a world where Black lives matters. How's my time, Melissa?
We're out of time almost, yeah.
And I'm finished.
Thank you. Thank you, Stacey. Joshua is going to speak next.
Thank you, Melissa. And it's great to be here and to share the panel with you all and to speak with the rest of you. To answer the question of the title of this webinar, which is, can we find a pathway forward? I would say absolutely yes, we can. And one of the best ways to determine that is just to look at what we already have, what the path that already laid behind us. Martin Luther King's legacy is one of Zionism. If you go beyond just what he said and what he did, you see that there was a very strong Black civil rights support for Israel in the form of an organization called BASIC, Black Americans Supporting Israel Committee, which is the reason why IPSI exists today. And one of the things that BASIC stood against was the Jewish blacklist. They stood against the hijacking of our own narrative. Bayard Rustin himself, who founded BASIC, who was Dr. King's right-hand man, he wrote several articles and spoke on several different platforms, urging the Black community to not embrace Yasser Arafat and the PLO, and that they're not our friends as much as they would claim to be, that they oppress their own people. And as Black American voices, that's our job to not only stand in support of our Jewish brothers and sisters who suffered and died with us, but to speak out against the oppression that they see happening with the Palestinians as well. And so for us, I think that not only is there a good path forward, that we have the blueprint behind us for that. As a Black American, you know, I've been following movements. I've been following Black Lives Matter since they started, since they kind of emerged after the Trayvon Martin killing, and then especially after Mike Brown. And I have a lot of friends who are members of Black Lives Matter. I have a lot of amazing people who do good work within the movement, or within within the movement. And I've also seen some very problematic statements coming from Black Lives Matter. And as a Black American, I've tried to use my voice as best as I can to have these conversations with my peers and with people who are close to me. And when I travel and speak on behalf of IPSI, to get us to see and resist attempts to hijack our narrative for their own purposes. Much like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in the 60s, which was hijacked by the anti-Israel narrative and just straight up anti-Jewish sentiment. I see a lot of that coming from the larger partnership with Movement for Black Lives, and then even within the leadership of Black Lives Matter. And though that is not true largely on the ground, part of what we do at IPSI is we just educate. You know, we talk about the strong bond that Blacks and Jews have had in history, and even today, where there are still the results of that. We talk about the HBCUs that had Jewish and Black professors and Jewish and Black students, because during segregation, Jews weren't seen as white, and there wasn't a place for them to learn. We talked to them about how even back with Booker T. Washington and Julius Rosenwald, how they came together and built thousands of schools for Black children because they weren't allowed to learn in white schools, and how that spawned a generation of very many educated Black Americans. And we talk about these things, and we also delve into and talk about how our struggle and how our pain has been time and time again taken over by other agendas and other narratives. And one of the things that we seek to do is to make sure that we're aware of this and that we don't allow that to happen. One of the things that I've seen, like I said, from the leadership in Black Lives Matter has been the co-founders, self-proclaiming Marxists, talking about Israel being an apartheid state, like as Stacey was saying, a genocidal regime. And like I said, though many people on the ground aren't aware of this, it's important to know that the not just a few people, but the founders have this in mind. And at the very least, to help them to separate when they do see these types of teachings and these other things seep in, that they'll remember our words and maybe even challenge those things within Black Lives Matter, or at the very least, not get involved with it. So there are many other, and the other thing is too, that I know we're talking about, and you mentioned it, the Black Lives Matter, there are many other organizations that have to do with both uplifting the Black community and that also don't denigrate other people groups. And I know that a lot of us know of some in our areas. I know Stacey's involved with some. I know myself as well. I can provide sources that, sometimes the conversation goes to, okay, well, if I don't support Black Lives Matter, what can I do? Well, there's a lot, that just because you might feel uncomfortable attaching yourself to a group that has these things in their charter, it doesn't mean that you don't think that Black Lives Matter. It just means that you just may not feel comfortable doing that. And that's completely understandable. And for me, I want more than anything for the truth to be out and for questions to be asked. So all that to say that we can and we absolutely can find a good pathway forward, and we can use the past as a lens to critically look at what we're doing and to improve that. And I with all my heart, I believe that the answer is in our own history.
Thank you, Joshua.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Next, we're going to hear from Marta.
Good afternoon, all. As Melissa said, and Stacey and Joshua explored, the Black-Jewish relationship in America is complex, with two diaspora peoples bearing trauma from the past, ancestral memories of when we ruled our own lands. We share hopes that democracy and law in the United States and Israel might establish and ensure basic human rights so that each people from both cultures, Black and Jewish, may find some happiness in life along the way. We only get one life, so as Spock would say, as Blacks and Jews, may we live long and prosper. To each life we bring our recent family past, shaped by a set of values. Mine were best expressed by my father, a founder of the Religious Action Center in Washington, D.C., that put tikkun olam, the moral repair of the world, the picking up of the loose threads, tikkun olam, social action might say, right at our Baltimore dinner table through the 1960s and 70s. Nightly, we'd hear stories, including how Martin Luther King came to his Jewish building with the closest leaders to write and strategize passage through Congress of every major civil rights law to unshackle the country from Jim Crow. Dad volunteered his own summer vacations to do civil rights legal work in Mississippi, explaining to his teen kids that he was just doing what the Haggadah taught us, that nobody is free until all are free. When Dad was kidnapped at gunshot in Mississippi, alone, and held at gunpoint by the Ku Klux Klan in the summer of '65, he showed us that activist courage can have a huge price tag. And yet, as I grew and read more, I discovered that people who live there year-round face this kind of tragedy on a regular basis through lynching. Black-Jewish relations, however, were indeed close in those days. I now live in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, a neighborhood whose Black-Jewish history has been and remains tense and troubled. The best explanation I have heard is, our two communities have never been properly introduced. You've surely heard from national news this year of blatantly anti-Semitic incidents, large and small, against Jewish people and property. Some arrests get categorized as hate crimes by the mayor's new task force, while others are irretrievable Jewish deaths, and premeditated murder has been charged. But in my immediate neighborhood, the Black-Jewish relationship is no relationship at all. Tense and troubled, with a few community leaders from both the Hasidic and the Black communities trying to begin dialogue. But whether you've been raised in a racially close or tense situation, or a bit of both, we are each ultimately unique human beings. We are granted a lifespan, hopefully more decades than just 2 or 3, with some happy highlights. We hope to find in the larger world a measure of decency and goodness. Some are blessed with artistic creativity to produce works that enlighten and uplift others. But when skin color or faith identity restricts us, hems us in, making lives unsafe at each public step, it is incumbent on us all to push back, as Jews and as Blacks, for air. George Floyd was a breaking point, causing hundreds of thousands to take to peaceful street protest in my city and yours, because we saw one human being pleading for air to breathe, while another callously snuffed it out. We can't ignore it or call it an exception in police behavior. My favorite t-shirt among the many protest expressions said, "Instead of accepting the things I can't change, I will change what I cannot accept." So looking at the long and recent past and present moments, our challenge here today is to explore a path forward. As Blacks and Jews, we can continue to distrust each other, or run parallel and separate struggles, or work together somehow. Since we sit here today at the start of summer, I'm recalling a beautiful piece of wisdom from my rabbi, who learned it from his rabbi. Each June, they'd say to their departing religious school children, "This summer, read a good book, take a long walk, and make a new friend." Good book, long walk, new friend. It's a framework for what could be a forward direction for Blacks and Jews. The good book, beyond the obvious choice of Torah and Bible, means to me that both communities are nearly illiterate on each other's histories. Many Jews didn't know until last week, with a lot of firecrackers, what Juneteenth was, although emancipation from slavery was a huge turning point for the African American community. As Jews, let that stand in our memory when saying that some Black leaders know little history of the Holocaust or Israel's establishment as a nation. There are books and resources aplenty now on Jewish and Black history to give us context to understand how the cultures were formed and what that all might mean today. If you prefer Zoom workshops and webinars, especially during this pandemic when so much is for free, I can recommend that and tell you that in a few hours, the largest temple in New York City, Temple Emmanuel, is having a 3-evening speaker series on Black-Jewish relations, including Susanna Heschel. Yes, that Heschel, the daughter of the rabbinic Rabbi Heschel, who marched alongside Dr. King in Selma. For reading, I recommend we all become very thoughtful regarding social media. I commend to you the Reformed Jewish Leadership statement of June 12th, a recent statement, they've done many. It's called Black Lives Matter is a Jewish Value. It's from the Reform Movement, the largest Jewish community in North America, and signed by approximately a dozen major Jewish organizations. Reform might not be your cup of tea ritually, but Reform Judaism as a movement is outspoken on Black lives and doing actions for years and recent years, including voter registration and other supportive work with African partners, African American partners. I'm skipping over some things that my panelists cover. Thank you. From the Reform Statement, just for example, our Jewish tradition is replete with instances of moral reckoning when we are asked to be present and accounted for. Ayecha, we are asked, where are you? We respond with a full-throated, Hinenu, we are here. The Reform framework for affirming Black Lives Matter includes recognition of diversity as a source of Jewish strength, to commit to ending systemic racism and white supremacy, and to accept discomfort while doing it, especially recognizing the much greater discomfort of our Black brothers and sisters on a daily basis. On Israel, the new Reform Statement promotes supporting BLM, although we hold differing views on Israel. If you need more development of that, you might read Rabbi Josh Weinberg, an Israeli who lives in the United States. His article recently is Why I Am a Zionist for Black Lives Matter. Now back to the rabbis. Clearly there is much to read. Back to the rabbi's 3-point advice. Number 2 was walking. Take a good walk. He means take time for personal reflection. Look deep inside. I'm glad to see my peer age group walking alone these days outside with masks, of course. Without everyone talking at us, we can bring some individual thinking in and move past tired old generalities on Black-Jewish relations. For the American Black community, events of this past year compare in significance to such sea-changing events as the First Zionist Conference in Basel, Switzerland. And we need to understand that meaning for the Black community. For myself, I've reflected on some of my favorite liberal organizations, dropping some, and exploring a few others. I say beware of repeating the same words you were saying last year about anti-Semitism, Israel, Blacks, Jews, Israel, or BLM, Black Lives Matter. It's all shifting ground. But if you personally reflect, pray, meditate, somehow relocate your core central values, you'll be better able to hear, sift, and accept recent news events with more confidence in the world's future and less despair. One of my takeaways, by the way, from Joshua's talk. We can do it. And last, make a new friend. To me, that speaks to the problem we have of silos of friends based on similar politics. Not everyone does, but many do. And it's hard to develop understandings of how other people may see events when we stick to people who think politically just like ourselves. It's relaxing, but it's not going to help us with a path forward. Right now, Black-Jewish relations between communities, and when we do interact with someone new, I feel it's brittle right now. Whole conversations can stop over a mistaken word or outdated expression. As whole communities, to be honest, we're not in very good alliance as Black and Jews. But we see some breakthrough articles published by one rabbi and one Black minister. That's good. Speakers share a dais, but don't break bread together often enough, or travel in similar circles, or hang out together And having that one friend from the other community, or quoting that one neighbor to show we can say what the other group might think, we know that's not enough. Since we don't know each other, it's not surprising to me that in Ferguson, Stacey did a good description of Rachel. Black leaders, I feel, were strong-armed at that point by the plank's author, Rachel, from Jewish Voice for Peace, neither Jewish nor peaceful. And they included an anti-Israel plank, which JVP later embellished with more lies in its Deadly Exchange campaign. Although I agree with Alan Dershowitz that this plank must be removed, even though it's buried now deep as a subnote in a platform, as Jews, we currently have no dialogue with BLM leadership to make this request productively.
Marta, 1 minute.
Yes, Israel is not the center of BLM's concerns. Intersectional theorists can be debated down. I generally beat them on the second point because they're not being used to being argued with. But if we Jews are not there for the Black community now in their crucial moment, why should they listen to us about Israel? So I say this, make a new friend, even if it's an old friend we haven't seen for a while, or a previously close community. Blacks and Jews share tremendous values to fight oppression and strive for the positive. So my path forward is this summer, read a good book, maybe 2 or 3, or a website. Take a long walk, yes, 3 or more, and surely make a new friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Marta. Noah.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. I'm going to speak a little bit about what I think are 3 pillars in our path forward that are, meant to sort of address issues that are rising right now in relation to the Black and Jewish relations. So the first I would say is respecting unique experiences of respective communities. The next is refocusing the movement. And the third is reclaiming our autonomy over our narrative and also over our own communities. So to begin with, I want to speak about respecting unique experiences. And I think a rising issue right now is that there's an increase in sort of a trap of false and misrepresented intersectionality on what it means to actually be part of a movement. So what we're seeing is this sort of idea of intersectionality misrepresented in order to create a litmus test to include oneself or exclude oneself from a movement. And what I'm speaking about is this idea that in order to be there for other people, you have to have had the exact same historical experience. And I think that's damaging because once we try and create, a specific playing field that puts all different rights and justice movements in the same boat, what we're doing is disrespecting legacy that certain communities have. So I'm going to get a little specific about this. Recently, as it was mentioned, there's this idea of a deadly exchange, that Israel and the Jews are responsible for police brutality and increasing it and making it worse. And Israel's training American police to be violent and brutal against Black people. So this obviously is a blatantly anti-Semitic trope in its own right. In addition to that, a huge issue with that is that it's not only anti-Semitic, but it's anti-Black. It disregards the experience of Black Americans that we've been oppressed since we were kidnapped and brought here in chains, hundreds of years before Jewish autonomy was reestablished in our homeland. And I think that as long as people are accepting of that sort of narrative, we're doing a disservice to the Black rights movement and struggle for Black justice. I think that, in the other way is there's a lot of Black and white sort of ideas of privilege and how that functions in a way to either include someone in a movement or exclude someone. I think that everyone in the United States who's not Black and who's not a descendant of slavery has a certain level of privilege over those who are, simply because they're not necessarily, stuck dealing with certain systems that were put in place to oppress people who are descendants of slaves, namely Black people. That being said, I think it's also important to recognize that everyone who has privilege doesn't necessarily have the ability to use it in the same way and doesn't necessarily have the historical experience of being treated as a white person. So when I'm speaking about this, I'm talking a lot about the Jewish community and the non-Black Jewish community, in which, many people, as it was mentioned, came to the United States and were not accepted into educational institutions, weren't allowed to buy land in certain places, and therefore, we're underprivileged compared to white people. That being said, there's still, the fact that there is a gap between that level of underprivilege and the level of oppression that Black Americans face as a result of slavery. So I think that it's important to recognize that these different communities have had these unique experiences, and they're not one-to-one comparison. That being said, that shouldn't be sort of an obstacle in order for our communities to work together to pursue justice. And I think if we look historically, HBCUs did not accept Jewish academics fleeing Nazi Europe because the Black leaders in those universities had gone through a Holocaust themselves. They did it because it was right, and they understood that that's the right thing to do when you're fighting oppression and discrimination. The Jewish leaders who helped found the NAACP alongside Black leaders did not do so because they had to break free of the shackles of slavery in the United States. They did so because they understood discrimination and understood the ways it disproportionately affected other Americans and Black Americans. And I think it's important to continue to respect that each of us have had these unique experiences. Our communities have had unique legacies with relation to oppression across the world and living in the diaspora, and embrace those differences as ways we can come together and work together and stop our differences from being used to divide us. The next thing I want to discuss is the idea of refocusing the movement. And I think that that's especially pertinent to what's going on right now with these conversations of Zionism and anti-Zionism within the Black Lives Matter movement. And obviously I'm a Zionist. I believe in Jewish liberation and Jewish right to self-determination in my homeland. That in no way should either be a cause or a cause for me to be included or excluded from the movement for Black lives. This is an issue about Black people being mistreated by a dominant white society that was designed to keep us down. This is not an issue of whether or not Jews have a right to live in our homeland. And what we've seen right now is that idea and that ideology being used to try and exclude Jewish people from a movement that we've historically been a part of. And I think there are two sides to that coin. The first is the method in which organizers try to tie the Black struggle to anti-Zionism, which is not historical and inaccurate. And I think the second part is when people sort of accept that premise. So allies in the Jewish community, or would-be allies, hear this sort of anti-Zionist rhetoric, and rather than fight back against it, accept it and use that as an excuse to absolve themselves of the responsibility to stand up for justice. And I think that, they're both two sides of the same coin. One is in which organizers are attempting to exploit the Black struggle and the Black experience to push anti-Semitism. And the other is when people internalize that and accept that anti-Semitism and absolve themselves of their responsibility to actually stand up for Black lives. And I think that if someone, it actually accepts the principle that Black lives matter, they'd be there regardless of whatever's going on. And that means calling out anti-Semitism and calling out bigotry. But that also means that it's being consistent about it. It doesn't mean only calling it out when it makes life easier for you and more comfortable for you. The third thing that I want to discuss is the idea of reclamation of autonomy. And I feel like this sort of wraps it all and ties it all together. So first is autonomy over our narrative. I think, that means me as a Black man realizing that it's my responsibility to call out people who try and demonize our leaders and delegitimize Black history and tie it to struggles that are completely unrelated because it's politically convenient for them. For example, you have people who are out today saying that we need to cancel Rosa Parks and Dr. Martin Luther King because both of them are Zionists. I think that's absolutely ridiculous and has no place within Black culture and the movement for Black lives. And it's even more damaging to see that rhetoric is coming from non-Black people who feel like they have a right to speak for our community. It's, on me as a Black man to call that out, not only for its blatant anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, but more so because it's a huge disservice to Dr. Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks, who, are the foundations of the civil rights movement in many ways. I think the other side of that is, reclaiming my story and my narrative as a Jewish man. That means that when someone is out here and trying to use my experience and my belief in Jewish liberation as a reason that I should, be at odds with my other belief of Black liberation, it's my job to call them out and to demonstrate that regardless of however they try and manipulate my experiences and my history and the history of my communities in order to exclude me from a movement, I refuse to accept that. And rather, I'm going to choose to stand up and actually fight, point out anti-Semitism where it is, and reclaim my place as a Jewish man and my community's place in the movement for justice for Black people. I think that those are three main points that I sort of wanted to discuss as far as the way that, we can sort of support Black lives and Black Lives Matter as a principle, and also, combat sort of anti-Semitism that's becoming more prevalent. I think the last thing I want to discuss about reclamation is the idea of reclaiming autonomy financially and economically. And what I see is that's sort of been a pillar to, you know, Black liberation and Jewish liberation historically. The reason that Black Wall Street and countless other Black neighborhoods and Black business districts were burnt down was because the dominant forces viewed that sort of financial freedom as a threat to their dominance. And in the same way, that's the reason why Jewish people throughout the diaspora have been prevented from purchasing land, have been prevented from supporting our own businesses and entering certain fields of profession, because people knew that that was a threat, because that would enable Jewish people to gain our autonomy. And I think that's actually an intersection that's overlooked, is that sort of autonomy over our own businesses and over our own communities is something that is key to Jewish liberation and Zionism. You know, even though we were told that we wouldn't have autonomy in our homeland, it didn't stop us from going to Israel, to pre-state Israel, so the issue of organizing different organizations, purchasing land, setting up a structure and a framework that eventually developed into the nation of Israel. And I think that the Black community has also consistently done that. And I think it's important for us to recognize the power in that and to support our own communities. Meaning, you know, I'm not necessarily just going to buy a challah from the supermarket. I'm going to go to the Jewish-owned business. If I have opportunity to support a Black-owned business, I'm going to do that over supporting others. But that also means for us to support each other. So Black people who are not Jewish supporting Jewish businesses, and Jews who are not Black supporting Black businesses, in order to build that sort of economic relationship that ultimately is something that is directly in our immediate control as far as combating institutional oppression. Thank you.
Thank you, Noah. Thanks to all 4 speakers. I'd like to now open the floor to questions. I'm going to request that you keep your question to 1 minute or less to get as many opportunities as possible. If you click on your participant button, you will get to the right of your screen a little button that says raise your hand. So if you have a question, you can do that now. And I will try to call on anyone who may have a question. You can direct it to anyone in particular, or if you just have a more general question. Noah, I'm going to ask you, did I give the correct direction? Because my screen shows something different. You click on participants, is that right?
Yeah, it's participants, and then there's a little tab at the bottom that says raise hand.
Okay, and then I'm going to send you, so Bob, I see you have a question. I'm going to send you a little message that asks you to unmute yourself, and then you go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, the question I have is, there are obvious commonalities between the Black experience and the Jewish experience. Obviously, they're not the same, but they're sort of like, you can't see it on my screen, they're like Venn diagram overlapping experiences. How is it that the Jewish and the Black communities can make common cause with each other in view of our history of being discriminated against a common experience of being killed for our color or our religion? How do we go about making common cause? Okay,
great question. Thank you, Bob. Stacey, would you like to answer that one? I sent you an unmute. If you would unmute yourself, Stacey.
Sure. One of the things that I learned in my social justice training from the Jewish Council on Urban Affairs is that we had to have those hard conversations and those intimate conversations before our feet hit the pavement in protest. So that we were in one another's spaces, talking, asking the questions, disagreeing, so that when we got out there, we were marching together. We had those hard conversations. And this can't be Twitter conversations or Facebook conversations. And I know with COVID, it's a little harder to get in person, but we do have to have those more intimate conversations where we're really getting to know one another and getting to know one another's story. Another thing that I learned is that you go where you're invited. You don't push your way in. You make yourself available and you go where you're invited. And also let people speak for themselves. I had to learn this myself. As a Jewish organizer, I was going into African-American communities that I did not live in. and that I had to check my own self and realize that I couldn't speak for the community. I had to be Jewish and ask questions and ask how could I support the community that I was working with. So it really just takes relationship building at a very foundational level. Reach out to those, the young people. We have to understand that it's not our generation that's leading the movement, it's young people. And so getting our young people together to have these conversations, we can teach them history and give them resources about what we did in the past, but we have to let them lead right now. But having those intimate conversations and even hashing out our differences of opinion in intimate spaces can help us work through those things, and then we can decide what our platform is and then get out there and work together on issues.
Thank you. Tracy, I sent you a message if you would unmute yourself and ask your question. Tracy?
Yeah, thanks, Melissa.
Okay, go ahead,
Nice
Tracy.
to meet you. First of all, I just want to say thank you to all the speakers. I mean, just listening to you has really, I don't know, I took a lot of notes and tried to listen. Noah, your 3 pillars, I wrote them down. And I did earlier today, my question is, as somebody who is a Zionist, who is identified as a person that is white, how can we form to let the Black community know that despite what they may have been told and or falsely educated on, that we are there for them? A suggestion I thought about, just because of the time that we were in with COVID, was, maybe starting a movement, and I hashtag it on my own page, that I'm a Zionist for Black Lives. And that's my hashtag, Zionist for Black Lives. Because I don't want people to see, because I like you, Noah, like, I believe in my right to self-determination, but I also believe in your right to self-determination and what that looks like for you, and respecting your experience, and Marta and Stacey. So I guess my question is, I thought about starting a group on Facebook called Zionists for Black Lives. In this climate with COVID, anything more than social media seems really scary to me. But if you have any other suggestions, I want to listen. I started St. Louis Friends of Israel here in St. Louis. So I don't have a problem starting anything and following through with it. But I'm also at a loss because I want to respect your experiences.
Okay, Noah?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question and thing to sort of tackle. I think that, first, that visibility is key. Starting like a hashtag and social media campaign, especially as far as reaching out to a lot of people in the way a lot of us are communicating now, I think is really key. I think that's a way you bring visibility to the fact that Zionism is not a monolith. And I think that that's what sort of the main goal of the people who are opposing Jewish involvement is, definitely trying to portray Zionism as a monolith that's convenient to their political narrative. And even by individuals going out and being present in Black Lives Matter and different movements, protests, is key to sort of raising awareness. I think on top of that, there's ways to move forward in organizing institutional education. And what I mean by that is highlighting the fact that Rosa Parks was a Zionist, Bayard Rustin was a Zionist, Dr. Martin Luther King was a Zionist. These are all people that in my family, in my household, I was taught about from a young age. Whether or not I learned about it in school, I think in Black households, it's important for us to learn about our elders and respect our elders. And by understanding the values that they had and how those were related to my struggle as a Black man and also as a Jewish man, I think that definitely helped me become confident and sort of foster that sort of pride and understand that my beliefs in Jewish liberation and Black liberation go hand in hand, rather than being something that should be at odds with each other. So I think that starting that awareness like you're doing on social media, and then finding ways to follow through on actual like institutional education, not only on the relationship between the two, but actual genuine education on what it means to be a Zionist, so that people can't be all around here on Twitter talking about Zionism is racism, and that's an effective definition, and actually understanding what it means to be a Zionist, who are Zionists, and how that's not at all at odds with the Black struggle. And the same goes for what it means to be, a proponent of Black liberation, that you have what I've witnessed recently on the other end of things, a lot of people who are saying Black Lives Matter has some people who are anti-Semitic. So the whole movement has no place for Zionists. It's anti-Semitic. It's at odds with Jewish liberation. And I think that's important to counteract and say, wait a minute, you realize that all these different people who, have been key figures in the struggle for Black rights have also been supportive of Jewish people, or have not necessarily made that, a key part of their identity to fight against Jews. That's not necessarily something that's true, and that's something that's being exploited.
Thank you, Noah. Toby, if you would like to ask your question, Toby. Toby, I had unmuted you, now you're muted. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
Firstly, this is a great panel, Melissa, and thank you to the panelists.
Thank you.
I hope you're recording this so
It's
other
recorded.
people could hear it. Just some observation I'd like some feedback on, and one comment, and I'll make the comment first. I just got off a premiere of a film called Minority of One, which was a journey of an Arab Egyptian who was raised as an anti-Zionist and anti-Semite, and his journey into being a pro-Zionist. And it was, to sum it up in one sentence, is all about education and exposure. And he was just indoctrinated. And when he was able to get himself educated and find the truth, he then became pro-Zionist and lost his roots as an anti-Zionist. So I think education and exposure is so key to understanding each other. With regard to the panelists and the subject today, and I might have missed it. I think I'm a little disappointed that there wasn't more of a denouncement from the Black Lives Matter movement when synagogues were defaced, and I realize this is a fringe movement from the looters who, very unfortunately, detracted from the message of the protesters. But the businesses and some of the Jewish businesses that were looted, and it turned. I moved to Washington in '68, just before the riots when Dr. King was assassinated, and there were many businesses and a lot of Jewish businesses that were looted, and I didn't hear any outcry. Why are we destroying Jewish businesses? What did they do to us? And I'd like to hear some comments on that, why there wasn't that kind of thing. And also, like, why are we getting more feedback from Black Lives Matter when people call out, well, Israel's an apartheid country? I don't hear any back talk from that. Please,
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you, Toby. Joshua, would you like to address that?
Sure, yeah. So first of all, I know the most recent story, and people have been sending me this article about what happened in Fairfax County in LA. That was kind of the big thing that happened, and we know Jewish synagogues were defaced, businesses were looted. I mean, one of the things that I was lamenting was the fact that a lot of Black businesses were also looted and destroyed during the riots, and like you were saying, there are a lot of different fringe groups within the movements that were agitating and stirring up trouble. Some of the troubling things, though, about some of the language that was coming out of Fairfax specifically was one of the leaders was encouraging this kind of like storming into the more affluent areas of their communities, so to your question, there needs to be and this is one of the things that I raised constantly, is that if there is a distinction, then there does need to be a calling out of the writers that are taking things too far. There needs to be a calling out of the writers that are destroying our own communities. And I'm going to echo what Noah said. I mean, two of the most important things I think that the Black community needs in order to keep moving forward is our economic freedom and education. access to better education. And when our own things get destroyed, when our own businesses are destroyed, that sets us back greatly. That really does hamper our ability to really come up. And you know, and I'm going to say one more thing too about that, is that one of the things that happened with after Tulsa, Oklahoma, when Black Wall Street was burned down, was that we rebuilt, and it was better than ever. You know, and so there were more attempts to dismantle Black Wall Street, just in different ways, which is why you don't see it today, which I can't talk about now, but suffice to say, yes, I do agree, and that there needs to be some sort of official statement coming from Black Lives Matter, saying, okay, we condemn these defacings, this language against. But the problem also is that, and what needs to be addressed, especially within leadership, is that there are some leaders in Black Lives Matter who support Louis Farrakhan, and so that makes it difficult, you know, to separate some of those things. So, like I said, I'm in agreement with you that there needs to be, and it has to come from, I think, the Black community and people within the movement saying, hey, like and I have seen some videos of people in Black Lives Matter who were confronting like the white supremacist groups and Antifa, saying, you know, you don't even belong here. You're not even from here. You don't care about our cause. You're why, like, leave. Like, why are you here? There needs to be more of that, and there needs to be like from the leadership an official position that says, no, we don't stand with that. And until there is, I think there's going to continue to be this hesitation and this confusion of, you know, can we really stand with Black Lives Matter? Can we do this? So yeah.
Thank you, Joshua. Some of our speakers need to leave. Others are willing to stay a little longer. So let's continue with Debbie's question. Debbie, you're unmuted.
Hi there, everybody. Thank you so much, Melissa and Stacey and Joshua and Marta, and hi, Noah, for kavod, for all of the courage and for teaching me. I have so much more to learn, as I know everyone here does. I have a specific question on a son of mine who is deferring college, kind of considering what to do in his gap year. He's going to be attending a Southern school in the fall of 2021. And I think it's so important, as we belong to our own minority communities, there's a sense of mishpacha in belonging, but there's also a sense of othering when we're not connecting to others. And so I feel like these young students of the next generation are the place to sow seeds for friendship and dialogue and for difficult conversations. Do you have any advice for someone who would like to volunteer this year, either paid or unpaid, or like a vetted curriculum where you can actually learn about the narratives of the Jews and African Americans in this country, so we can also shift the dialogue from what's going on in the Middle East to what's happening in our own backyards, so we can forge relationships together? What would your advice for him be? Thank you.
Thank you. So this is a question about for your son who's going to be a student. So maybe Noah, if you're comfortable answering that.
Yeah, I could offer a little bit. I think for me, I didn't take a gap year, so I'm not too familiar with specific programs. But I think that that's actually like a very important idea to focus on. I know that there are a lot of different Jewish organizations that do work on justice work for people who are taking gap years. And I think that that's like a great time to actually explore. I think that that's a point that needs to be elevated more, is the fact that I think more than anyone, it's this generation, my generation and my peers, who are sort of getting caught in this restructuring and misrepresentation of what social justice means in relation to Jews and Black Americans. So I think that it's on us to try and find ways to prevent that, because what we're seeing right now, I don't think is a continuation of a path. I think we're seeing a deviation from that path of Black people and Jewish people working together for justice. And I think it's on people like your son, tell him I said hi, actually working and using their time as far as like gap years to prepare to organize once we get to campus and actually be vocal in the movement.
Okay, and I could direct you, and I was going to say this at the end, but I know some people are leaving. On our website, we have some information that might be helpful. I don't know if you've seen our website, but allianceforisrael.org, and the 4 is a numeral 4. So I could certainly talk to you more about that at another time. Thank you. Jill, if you would like to ask your question, I've unmuted you.
Yeah, I too want to thank you all for this. This is really interesting. Some of my concerns are coming out in the questions people are typing, but I'm really, really concerned about how many people have no idea what the Black Lives Matter really stands for. The anti-Semitism, the anti-defunding of the police, the pro-Palestinian, they don't know. People just don't know. And I have a hard time supporting anything that has that kind of focus as a Zionist. I really appreciate hearing from our Black Jewish speakers today that they don't support this, and I wish there were more voices like yours out there making this point really clear, because you don't hear it. You don't hear it. And also to the point where I'm upset with plenty of Jews who are anti-Zionist. That I don't understand, but that's a whole other topic anyway. So I really appreciate, especially the Black people, Jewish people talking like this. I have never heard this before, and I'm grateful, and I would love to hear more of that, so that we can all support you and not have this horrible rift in our head about what where they stand. So it's really not a question, it's more of what I
Okay, thank you for sharing that. Appreciate that. I think that's an important sentiment to share. I think a lot of people are feeling similar sorts of things. Thank you. Mark? Mark,
yes,
Mark, go ahead, Mark. Hi, Mark.
Hi. Yes, I think it was Noah who mentioned about there are people out there who are talking about canceling Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks because they were Zionists. And we, in the modern social media world, canceling is a big thing, and it can cause great harm. It's one of those things where it makes you think twice about sticking your head up, because you know somebody's going to be out there, not just somebody, but an entire, this is sort of the wrong metaphor, but an entire hornet's nest is going to be out there looking to chop it off once you stick your head up. And so I'm wondering if any of you, particularly the speakers who obviously have been out there talking about things from a perspective that is, in the modern discourse, I would say controversial. Do you have any thoughts or any advice on how to, I guess, how to do it and survive?
Stacey, did you want to address that?
Specifically, how to do what and survive, Mark?
How to express an opinion that doesn't go along with what nowadays seems to be the required mainstream narrative, an opinion that's at all controversial, and not risk having having a million. Well, I mean the minor one is having a million people attack you on social media, and lie about you. The bigger concern is have them lie in such a way that you either lose your job or can't find clients or whatever. Basically their lies can have real world consequences. And how do you survive that?
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure I understood. When I was more in the academic circles, one of the things that we proposed is that in our current educational system, early childhood and post-secondary, that we had a mandatory courses on civil discourse. That is something that we've lost the ability to do and to have. I mean, you used to have really elegant debates between people who did not agree with one another at all, but knew how to make cogent, rational points so that they could get their messages across. Our young people, again, are leading the charge these days, and I think that they really need the tools to understand that words have power, and there's a way to get your views across, even if you don't agree, that are in a civil way. Now, I'm not saying that, some people say that, oh my gosh, this is not a time for civility, but I'm just talking about as far as education, and in the, that's a place that we have tremendous power. We need to fully educate people on African American history, that we were not immigrants that were providing free labor. That was in some books. And then we also need to teach our students how to have and respect how to have civil discourse in a society, because most of this is going on college campuses where it's really volatile. And I think that if you're going to express a contrary opinion, that's fine. Let's do it in a way that is civil, that is academically rooted, and where we can come along in a Jewish way and have an opinion and an opposing opinion, and people can decide for themselves. No one has to be right or wrong. I think that's a very Jewish principle. But again, I'm speaking of kind of more of an academic educational framework, which is where I've done most of this advocating for this kind of thing.
Do any of our other panelists want to respond to that? And then we'll take one more question before we end.
I could speak a little bit about the social media aspect about it. I think that, I want to make it clear also that the individual who was posting things about canceling Dr. King and Rosa Parks is first someone who's not Black nor American. And I think a lot of people recognize that. So that's not like a general viewpoint within the Black community at all. I think that that's just an indicator of ways that outside actors are trying to exploit our struggle and our history to fit their own convenient agendas and tie whatever their political goal is to our movement. And I think that as far as putting yourself out there, I think that social media is kind of like that. That's the way the culture is. And that they're, if you're respectful and obviously not insulting anyone, then, you can't really control how people respond to you. So for me, I think I try not to give other people shine. If they're spreading hatred, I try not to use my platform to elevate anyone else. So I'm not going to be saying the name of the person who's out here advocating to cancel Dr. King and Rosa Parks, because I don't want to give them that sort of attention that they're seeking. And I think that a lot of what we see now, even with regards to this cancel culture, is people who are seeking attention in one way or another. So I think the best way to fight that is to deprive them of attention and focus more on proactive work to actually elevate your community and your goals, regardless of criticism you get, while also staying safe, obviously, if it starts to become an issue of threats.
Thank you, Noah. All right, let's take one last question. Zev, you would like to ask your question?
Yeah, I live in London, not in London, I live in the UK in High Wycombe, but we've got similar issues that you face in the United States. But I just got a couple of quick points. The UK Jewish community have just established a commission on racial inclusivity, where we're looking at the whole relationship between Black Jews and the wider Jewish community, for example, in safer spaces. I think that, and actually we're the first religious community in the UK to do this. So I think that may be something could be of interest to American Jewry. But my other thing is that a lot of, it seems to me that there's a perception of the Jewish community as being white. And we're a very multicultural, multi-ethnic community, in my view. And it's a perception, unfortunately, that people have of the Jewish community. My view is that the more diverse we are, the stronger we are politically, culturally, and socially. And how do we break down this misconception? And secondly, my final question, Noah mentioned about this thing on social media about the Israeli police is now being blamed for police brutality in the United States. And this is actually spreading like wildfire amongst the social media networks. I mean, I'm on a network of 20,000 people, or people mainly based in the Caribbean. The only reason I'm on there because I love the Caribbean and I've got friends. And this has been put on there, and I've had to challenge this matter. So it is spreading like wildfire, this issue of this police brutality, unfortunately, on these various networks. And I think one of the things about the social media is that people are very good at lying on social media. For example, only recently they had a photograph of somebody kneeling on the head of somebody else, saying this was an Israeli police officer. But I quickly had a look at it, and it was actually, in the end, it was found to be a Chilean police officer. But they're immediately blaming Israel, so it's a very tough situation. Okay, sorry about it.
Thank you. No worries at all. Thank you for sharing. And we're thrilled that we have an international audience today, so thank you. So I would like to thank everybody for joining. I think that I got everybody's question. It was a great pleasure to have you all with us today. Thank you to our panelists for offering their very diverse and poignant and insightful views. I've posted again our website if you'd like to learn about future events. We post articles, we post campus happenings and all sorts of other things. So thank you once again. If you didn't see the chat, our website is www.allianceforisrael.org, and the 4 is a numeral. So many thanks once again, and best wishes to all. Be well. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks, Melissa.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much.